Due to the current situation amidst the outbreak of COVID-19, it means that as a community we won't be able to gather together and publicly pay tribute to our diggers on Anzac Day this Saturday. This is an important day in my home, and it is times such as these that reinforce the need to uphold community values and traditions. The long-held Australian tradition of recognising sacrifices made by individuals for the good of many, remembering the fallen and paying tribute to all Australians who have stepped forward and served their country. In my speech today, many of the words come from a man who lived the Anzac experience firsthand. Hell, I was scared. Almost every second man was dead and hope was lost. I prayed as I had been taught as a kid. If somebody had said run for the beach, I would have been an easy winner. This was how my great-grandfather, Ken Millar, MC of the 2nd Battalion, recalled the first frantic hours of the landings at Gallipoli. Today I'm going to share his Gallipoli story and reflect on what it means to be an Anzac, returning to his story. I took my section up and over the first scrubby hill and down a gully to the next hill. Here the firing became louder and odd wounded men were coming back, and there was a good few dead lying about. A lot of spent bullets were flying around making a crack like a stock whip. You don't hear the one that hits you, we soon found that out. On top of the next ridge, I stopped a bullet in the front of my right thigh. It was like a kick from a horse and bowled me over. I was very lame, and a 3rd Brigade stretcher bearer held me to the chaotic beach. The lifeboats, as they unloaded men coming in, filled up with wounded going back. I was put on a transport. The deck was covered by wounded of all sorts. The more serious ones were taken down to a lounge deck, where a couple of naval surgeons and some orderlies were at work. I showed my leg to one of them, and he told me to get the hell out of his road, as he had badly wounded men to look after. At that point he decided to return to Gallipoli. So he teamed up with a New Zealand sergeant and looked for a way back. They saw the lifeboats tied up alongside their vessels and hatched a plan. I slipped down the gangway again, and the blokes in the barge put us up in the bow behind a stack of cases. An officer came down to the barge and asked the NCO in charge, had he seen the 2nd Battalion Corporal, a New Zealander? He said no. We eventually got ashore again, and it was daylight and we parted. This was the second time he landed at Gallipoli. He would go on to land twice more in the coming months. He rejoined the 2nd Battalion in the morning of the 26th of April and returned to the front line. Just before dark on Tuesday, the lieutenant who was on my right told me we would have to move back to our own line, as he considered we were too far to advance our own troops. He told me to pass the word along the line to retire in ones from the left. Eventually, only the lieutenant and I were there. He ordered me to go. My right leg was by then very stiff from the early wound, and all I could do was walk up the hill through the waist-high scrub. I was hit in the left leg by a dum-dum bullet and a clean wound in the left arm. I went down and tried to bandage my left leg as best I could. We all carried field dressings. I haven't got much recollection of what happened. Loss of blood, weakness. I must have lain out for at least one night and part of a day. It could have been more. He spent 2 days in no man's land before being found by a New Zealand company. This time he was evacuated to Alexandria in Egypt, where he spent 3 months in hospital recovering. Whilst in hospital, he was given the opportunity to return to Australia. He declined and returned to the battalion in early August 1915 and was shocked to see the condition of his mates. The 2nd Battalion records the losses from the landing. They had landed with 31 officers and 937 other ranks. Lieutenant Stevens did a roll call on the 28th of April. 16 officers and 434 men were killed or wounded. After the roll call, Colonel Brand, with tears streaming down his cheeks, addressed the men and gave them unstinted praise for their fine work. On returning to Gallipoli on the 28th of August, my great-grandfather wrote, I was amazed and horrified to see the state of and condition of the survivors of our grand battalion. Nearly all the men had dysentery and yellow jaundice and were in dirty clothes covered in lice and in a very bad way. It was at this time the troops were rotated off Gallipoli to the Greek island of Lemnos for rest and recuperation. Here's how he remembered his time on Lemnos. There was a big Greek-owned canteen, but you could only get food by a written order from a senior officer. We had this parade every day. A certain amount of beer and stout and biscuits were an issue for nothing. I had my 21st birthday there, and it was decided a celebration was due. At this time, amongst the very lousy cigarettes we were issued was a brand called Major Drapkin. Tom Mann was then regimental quartermaster, so I got one of the requisition forms from him that would get goods from the Greek canteen. The whole company of about 30 of us put in cash, and we filled the form in for beer, stout, and biscuits and other suitable food. I arranged a small party and at a suitable time marched them down to the canteen and gave the Greek owners the form and the money. That was good enough for them, and I bet it's the only time they saw a form signed by Major Drapkin of the Highland Light Horse Infantry. We got away with it, and a good time was had by all. The battalion's time on Lemnos ended on the 29th of November, and he landed for the 4th time at Gallipoli. Winter was fast approaching, and life on the peninsula was becoming harder and harder. The first blizzard on the peninsula on the 27th of November, changing the landscape in an instant. It was at this time the plans were prepared for the evacuation of Gallipoli. History tells us how the evacuation took place. The battalions were broken into A, B and C parties, with the C parties being the last to leave. They were responsible for firing the occasional shot in no man's land, lighting candles and fooling the Turkish into thinking that the entire Australian army was still in place. My great-grandfather commanded one of the C parties and was the only non-commissioned officer at Gallipoli to do so. By 10 p.m. on the 19th of December, the section of line from Queensland Villas and Tassie Post, normally held by 120 men, was held by 5. The entire section previously held by the 1,000-strong 2nd Battalion now had 5 officers and 10 other ranks in place. Our packs and all personal belongings, except paybook and identity disc, were taken away by the other parties. It was never expected that his last party would get off. Tom Mann, who was then quartermaster sergeant of the battalion, gave me a spare water bottle full of naval OP rum. He said, "You and Kelly might want this." The longest of nights has an end, and at 2:35 a.m, a runner going past to the left to bring in D Company warned me to be ready to follow them to BSAP. Along came Captain Rollins, Jack O'Connell and Bailey from D with Kelly, and we assembled in the SAP. Colonel Cass called the roll, the senior of each company answering, and without a further word, he checked us out of the SAP and led us to the beach. We were challenged at several points and checked off, but there was no delay, and on reaching Watson's Pier at 3:15, we immediately disembarked after throwing our bombs into the sea. As the boat pushed off, a mine burst in our odd line, and the Turks opened rifle fired right along the front. The bullets whined and spattered around the barge, and we made our last duck to the Turkish fire and left to the enemy his native land, which he had gallantly defended. At the 2015 Gallipoli Centenary service, His Royal Highness Prince Charles ended his address with a few words penned by my great-grandfather. I'll finish by sharing them with you. Then again, there was the question of our dead mates. The Gallipoli campaign was a totally different proposition to that of France. We lived at Gallipoli with our dead alongside us. Owing to the lack of our cemeteries, we always had ours under our eyes. The hardest feature of the evacuation was in leaving those dead comrades behind. They had died facing the impossible, and to us they had bequeathed a sacred trust to carry on and succeed. First, the landing thinned out the battalion and we buried the dead alongside us. Then May 18 took its toll, and the awful carnage of the pine filled the cemetery above Shrapnel Gully. Jack Murphy, in his notes for our history, states that as his party stole away from the line, they took off their hats passing the crosses. An old, hard-bitten Anzac swept silent tears and felt the remorse of a man having let his mates down. Facing adversity with courage and maintaining a clear vision of what happens, with a dash of Aussie wit and the cheek of a larrikin, my great-grandfather not only served his country in World War I, but also World War II, and was fortunate enough to return to his family. I am very proud of his service and share that pride with all who have and do serve our country as part of the armed forces and their many families. I implore all Australians to maintain the Anzac tradition. It is a part of who we are, where we come from and what we stand for. For me to be an Anzac is to aspire to selfless commitment for one's country and its people. And I believe Captain Ken Millar, MC, was one of those that exemplified this commitment, and I pay tribute today in his service and the many like him. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.